The second time I woke up, it was because my own breath had frosted the windshield thick enough to blind me. 3 blankets. 1 gas gauge sitting on a quarter tank I couldn't spend. 41 degrees, according to the dashboard display I'd learned to read by streetlight. I counted these things instead of counting the weeks since I'd had an address, because counting weeks made my chest do something I didn't have a name for yet, and counting objects was safer. My name is Wren Castellan. I am 24 years old. I presented Omega 11 months ago in a conference room with the lights on, and my father has not said my name since. I want to tell it in order, because the order is the only thing I still control. Before the car, there was Kestrel Draft and Design, a firm with brass letters on frosted glass and 40 drafting tables, and one holiday party where my suppressant patch failed under the heat of too many bodies and too much champagne, and the whole room found out what I was in the space of about 90 seconds. I remember the silence first. Then I remember Camille Voss, client liaison, sherry-colored dress, setting her glass down on my drafting table hard enough to slosh red wine across a set of load calculations I'd spent 6 weeks perfecting. "Careful," she said, not looking at me. "We wouldn't want an Omega handling anything structural." A laugh went around the room like a struck match catching. "They're sweet for decorating, not building." I was let go 9 days later. "Restructuring," the letter said. "I have it memorized. I have most cruel things memorized. It's a family trait, though my father would call it something else. He is a city compliance officer who has spent 30 years believing that respectability is a designation you can choose if you simply want it badly enough. When I presented, he stood in the doorway of my childhood bedroom with my mother's photograph in his hand. She'd been gone 3 years by then, taken by a fever no suppressant could touch, and he told me that she would have been ashamed. I have not been inside that house since. What nobody at Kestrel ever learned, because I never let them see it, is that I am good, not talented in the soft, forgivable way people mean when they compliment an Omega's hobby. Good the way a bridge is good, load-bearing, tested, indifferent to whether anyone believes in it. I can look at a beam schedule and feel where it lies before I can prove it on paper. My mother used to fold cranes with me at the kitchen table when my hands shook, small, savage, fast movements that gave the panic somewhere to go instead of my throat, and I built that same stillness into reading structures instead. Nobody had asked me to build a tower. Nobody had asked me anything. I had been reduced in less than a year to a woman doing freelance calculations for cash in library parking lots, and then to a woman with no library card because the address on file no longer existed. So, the car. A 10-year-old sedan parked on Larkspur Lane outside the one house where a person still knew my name and said it like it hadn't cost her anything. Josie Marchetti had been my only real friend since community college, back before either of us knew what either of us would become, and she did not know I'd been sleeping outside her mother's gate for 4 nights because I hadn't told her. Some kinds of drowning you don't announce. You just try to keep your chin above the next thing. The knock on the glass didn't sound like a knock. It sounded like someone had decided the window was in her way. I came up out of sleep swinging my arm across my face before I even placed the sound, and through the fog I saw a shape in a long, dark coat, unmoving, patient as weather. I rolled the window down 4 inches because my hands were too cold to do more. "You're parked on my property line," the woman said. Low voice. Even. The kind of even that has never once needed to be raised. "I'll move," I said. "Sorry, I'll move right now." "You won't." She said it the way she'd say the sky was gray, not cruel, just true. "Get out of the car." I want to say I refused out of pride. I didn't. I refused out of shame, which is a colder thing entirely, and she watched me refuse it with an expression that didn't change, which somehow undid me faster than anger would have. Then, she did something I did not expect from a woman who owned, according to Josie's stories, roughly a third of the skyline downtown. She crouched, brought herself level with the window instead of making me look up at her. "I am not asking twice for your comfort," she said. "I am asking twice for mine. I will not sleep tonight knowing a girl is freezing 40 feet from my door. So you can get out and come inside where it's warm, or I can stand here in the cold arguing with you until you do. Either way, I'm not leaving." Up close, her scent finally reached me through the cracked window, black walnut and struck flint, dark and controlled, the kind of cold that isn't empty, it's banked. It didn't smell like danger. It smelled like a door that had been shut for a long time on purpose. "I don't have anywhere else to go," I admitted, and it came out smaller than I meant it to. "I know," she said. "That part isn't a secret. Josie's told me about her friend from the drafting program who stopped answering texts 8 months ago. I put it together somewhere around blanket 3. She reached into her coat pocket and pressed something small and warm from her hand into mine before I could pull back. A brass key, old, worn soft at the teeth from years of the same palm. That opens the side door. It stays unlocked for you regardless. You will never sleep in the cold again, not on my land, not on my watch." I looked down at the key like it might dissolve. When I looked up, she was already walking back toward the gate, coat moving like she had somewhere colder to be angry at. "Wait," I called. "I don't even know your name." She didn't turn around. "Helena Marchetti," she said. "Come inside, Wren. The kettle's already on." She'd known my name before I gave it to her. I sat with the key warming in my fist for a long minute before I found the nerve to follow, and I did not yet understand that I had just crossed the only threshold in my life that would matter. I moved through the side door like a thief who'd been handed a key instead of forced to pick a lock, which is its own kind of disorientation. The kitchen alone was larger than the apartment I'd lost. A woman with silver-threaded braids and forearms dusted in flour looked up from a pot on the stove and did not ask why a stranger was standing in her doorway at midnight in 3 days of the same clothes. She just said, "Sit then," like the matter had already been decided somewhere above her pay grade, which, I'd learn, it had. That was Bettina. She fed me broth and bread and did not once look at me like I was something that had gone wrong. Helena disappeared upstairs without another word, and I told myself that was the whole story. A rich woman's charity, dispensed and complete, the kind you don't examine too closely because it might evaporate. It was not complete. 3 weeks later, I was standing in the glass-walled lobby of Marchetti Holdings' downtown tower, wearing a blazer Josie had loaned me and a visitor badge that felt like a costume, waiting to say a proper thank you I'd been rehearsing in the elevator mirror. That was when I heard 2 junior engineers arguing over a floor plan pinned to a presentation easel. Voices pitched with the particular panic of people about to be wrong in front of someone important. "The dead load's fine," one insisted. "It's with intolerance." It wasn't. I knew it wasn't the way I know my own hands. I'd read enough falsified sounding numbers at Kestrel to recognize the shape of a corner being cut before I could name which corner. "It isn't," I said, before I'd decided to say anything at all. Both men turned. So, I realized a half-second too late did the small crowd gathered near the boardroom doors, among them a woman in a slate suit whose posture I already knew from a doorway on Larkspur Lane, and beside her, unmistakably, black walnut and struck flint even across 20 feet of marble. "Excuse me?" the engineer said, more insulted than curious. "Your live load assumption doesn't account for the mechanical penthouse," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, walking closer because retreat had stopped being an option the moment every head in the lobby turned. "You've got it classified as storage occupancy." It isn't. Storage occupancy caps out lower than what you're actually putting up there. Recalculate at assembly use loading and your over-tolerance by about 11%. Silence, the specific silence of a room recalibrating around a person it hadn't planned for. Then Helena Marchetti crossed the lobby floor, unhurried, and studied the drawing over the engineer's shoulder with an attention that made the whole room hold its breath along with mine. "Run it again," she said, not to me. To him. At assembly loading. He ran it again, 11%, near enough to make his face go pale. Helena turned to me at last, and up close her scent had changed texture, sharper at the edges, something like recognition cutting through the cold. "Where did you learn to read a floor plan like that?" "Nowhere anyone paid me for," I said. "That's about to change." She said it the way she said everything, a statement issued rather than an offer extended, though I would learn later that with Helena, those were often the same act of mercy wearing different clothes. Marisol, a woman near the boardroom door, compact, watchful, a scar through one eyebrow, straightened at the name. Draft Miss Castellan a contract. Structural review, direct report to me, and clear the garden cottage behind the main house. She'll need somewhere close enough to call when the numbers don't sit right. Helena, Marisol's voice carried a warning wrapped around loyalty, the tone of someone who had earned the right to question her and rarely used it. "You don't know her." "I know she just caught something 4 licensed engineers missed," Helena said, gaze not leaving mine. "That's more than most people ever prove to me in a year." I opened my mouth to say I hadn't come here for a job, only to say thank you for a key and a bowl of broth, and what came out instead was, "Okay, small word." It rearranged my whole life. That night, Bettina walked me through the cottage behind the main house, narrow bed, drafting table already installed by the window as if someone had known. A lamp angled exactly the way I like to angle lamps, though I'd never told a soul that preference. Josie found me there an hour later, sitting on the edge of the mattress, still holding my visitor badge like evidence. "You're staying," Josie said, delighted, dropping onto the bed beside me, in my actual backyard. "This is the best thing that's happened to me since I got my license." "Your mother scares me," I admitted. "She scares everyone." Josie grinned. "Except, apparently, you. I've never seen her cross a room for anyone the way she crossed it for you today." Marisol's probably still recalculating that, too. I laughed for the first time in months, and it felt like something unlocking that had nothing to do with brass or teeth or a side door. Outside my window, past the hedge, the main house's lights burned late into the dark, one lamp on the top floor that never seemed to go off, and I fell asleep wondering, not unkindly, what kept a woman like Helena Marchetti awake. The cottage had heat that worked, and a lock that clicked shut soft as a held breath, and for the first 4 nights I lay in that unfamiliar bed cataloging the difference the way I'd cataloged cold before. Thread count. The particular hush of a house with money in its walls. The fact that Bettina left a plate covered in foil on my step each evening, whether I'd asked for it or not. Proof of care, offered sideways, never announced. On the 5th night, it was a small dish of olive oil cake, unprompted, and I stood in the doorway with the foil still warm in my hands because I had mentioned my mother's cake exactly once, in passing, to no one but Bettina 3 days earlier. "You remembered," I said the next morning, finding her elbow deep in bread dough. "I remember what I'm told," Bettina said, without looking up, which I understood was as close as she came to admitting she'd gone to some trouble. The main house, when I was finally invited past its kitchen, unfolded like a building that had learned to keep its own secrets. Marble in the entry hall, yes, and a staircase that turned twice before it reached the light. But also a locked study on the second floor that Marisol guarded with a keycard reader nobody explained, and a portrait at the top of the stairs, a woman with a warm, unremarkable smile, nothing like Helena's banked cold that no one in the household ever mentioned by name. I noticed things. It's the one part of my competence nobody had ever managed to train out of me. Marisol noticed me noticing. She caught me at the base of that staircase on my second week, arms crossed, eyebrow scar drawn tight. You're sleeping in her cottage, eating her food. Working her contracts, she said, low enough that Bettina's radio in the next room swallowed it whole. I don't know what you are yet, Castellan, charity case, or something else, but I've kept this house standing for 11 years, and I will not watch her get burned again. Burned by who? I asked. Marisol's jaw worked once, twice, and then she simply walked away, which told me more than an answer would have. I filed it beside the locked study and the unremarkable, unnamed smile at the top of the stairs, and went back to my drafting table, where the numbers, at least, told me the truth without making me ask twice. Camille Voss made her reappearance on a Tuesday, 3 weeks into my contract, stepping off the executive elevator in a suit the color of good news and bad intentions both. I hadn't known she'd left Kestrel. I hadn't known she'd landed at Marchetti Holdings as VP of Operations, 3 floors above my new desk, until she walked past my drafting table, paused, and said, in a voice pitched for an audience of exactly the right people, "Well, aren't you resourceful?" Camille, my own voice, came out flatter than I expected. Good, flat was armor. I heard you caught an error in the Halcyon Point loading, she said, tilting her head like she was appraising livestock. How resourceful of Helena, keeping a stray around for tricks like that. She let her gaze drop, deliberately, to the visitor badge still clipped to my blazer, though I'd had a real one for a week. Does she know what you are yet? Or are you still hiding the collar under long sleeves? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Helena's voice came from the far side of the open floor, low enough that the whole room still heard it. Camille, my office. Whatever passed between them behind that door, I never learned the words of it, only the aftermath. Camille emerging 10 minutes later with her composure fully restored, smiling at me on her way past like nothing at all had happened, which frightened me more than the insult had. That evening, Helena found me on the cottage step, staring at the one lamp that never went dark on the top floor of the main house. That's her study, Helena said, following my gaze, before I'd asked. Anna's, my wife's. The name landed in the yard like something dropped from a height. She's been gone 6 years. I keep the light on because she stopped. Started again, quieter, because she used to work late, and I used to fall asleep to that light instead of the dark, and some habits outlive the reason for them. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it more than the words could carry. Cormorant Tower, Helena said, like the words cost her something specific to spend. You'll hear the name eventually. It went up 9 years ago. It came down, partially, during a stress test 8 years ago, and Anna was inside verifying the numbers herself because she didn't trust the report she'd been handed. Her hand, I noticed, had gone very still against the porch rail, the way mine went still over a beam I already knew would fail. I've spent every year since making sure no one signs a load calculation in my company that hasn't been checked twice. And then Camille's father retired, and I let her have his desk, because grief makes you sentimental about the wrong people sometimes. Was the report falsified? I asked, already half certain of the shape of the answer. I was told it was human error, Helena said. I was told a great many things that year. Her eyes found mine, and for a moment the cold banked all the way down to something raw underneath it. You caught an 11% error in an afternoon that 4 licensed men missed for a month. I would very much like to know what else you'd catch if I gave you the cormorant file and enough time. I said yes before I understood what saying yes would cost either of us, and somewhere above us that lamp burned on, patient as a held door, while a summons I couldn't refuse settled itself quietly into my chest. The cormorant file took 4 days to requisition and 11 hours to read. And on the 12th hour, standing at my drafting table at nearly midnight, I found the signature. Not a name. A pattern, the same rounded loading factor, shaved by exactly the same margin, on both the 8-year-old cormorant calculations and the fresh halcyon point drawings currently under construction 6 blocks from where I stood. Someone had used the identical shortcut twice, 8 years apart, confident no one would ever lay the documents side by side. I brought it to Helena at midnight because some truths don't keep until morning. She read the pages standing in her study doorway, under Anna's lamp, and her face did something I hadn't seen it do yet. Not cold, not banked, just still. The particular stillness of a person absorbing a wound they'd been braced for years without knowing the shape it would finally take. "Camille," she said. Not a question. The same hand, I said. Same margin, same rounding error, both times. Whoever built the cormorant numbers built the halcyon numbers. Her father built cormorant, Helena said. She built halcyon. She set the file down with a care that frightened me more than fury would have. "Draft me a formal report. Tonight I want it airtight before I bring it to the board." I never got the chance to finish it. By 7 the next morning, Marisol was at my cottage door, face carved from granite, informing me that security had found an unauthorized copy of confidential structural files on my personal drive, time-stamped and flagged, and that Camille Voss had already filed a formal complaint accusing me of industrial espionage on behalf of a rival firm. "That's a lie," I said, ice moving up through my chest so fast I could barely form the words. "I've never, I believe you," Marisol said, low, urgent. "That's not the problem. The problem is, the file's there, Wren, sitting on your drive with your login stamped on it, and the board meets at 9. And Helena is not currently in a position to defend you without it looking like she's protecting the woman she's." Marisol stopped herself. Jaw tight. "Just get to the meeting. Bring everything you have, and don't say a single word legal hasn't cleared first." I sat in that boardroom at 9 a.m., under 6 pairs of unfamiliar eyes and Camille Voss's small, satisfied smile, and Helena Marchetti, the woman who had pressed a key into my frozen hand and told me I would never sleep in the cold again, looked at me across that table with a face gone entirely to banked winter, and said, for the record, that Miss Castellan's access would be suspended pending investigation. I understood, distantly, that it was strategy. I understood nothing at all, sitting there, except the cold. The suspension lasted 6 days, and I spent every one of them in the cottage doing the one thing I still knew how to do, without anyone's permission, checking numbers, over and over, until they told me the same true thing they'd told me the first time. Josie brought me food I didn't eat and sat with me in silences I didn't fill. On the 4th night, a storm rolled in off the water hard enough to knock the power out across the whole property, and Marisol came pounding on the cottage door not for me, but for help. A live wire down near the generator shed, a fire risk, and every able hand needed before the backup systems failed, and Halcyon Point's remote monitoring went dark along with everything else. We worked the storm together by flashlight, all of us, Helena included, coat soaked through, hands raw from hauling cable, and somewhere in the middle of it, reaching for the same length of conduit, our hands closed over each other's in the dark. Neither of us let go right away. "I should have defended you," Helena said, rain running down the line of her jaw, voice pitched only for me under the wind. "In that room, I let the strategy speak instead of the truth, and the truth was you did nothing wrong. You needed the board to think you weren't compromised," I said. "I understood. That's the problem," she said. "I wasn't thinking about the board. I was thinking about not losing you the way I—" She stopped, throat working, rain sluicing between us like the storm itself was trying to finish her sentence for her. "Tell me to stop talking, and I will." "Don't stop," I said, barely above the wind. "I have wanted, since the night I found you in that car," Helena said, each word laid down like a load-bearing beam, tested before it took weight, to be the reason you never have to be cold again. "Not the house, not the key. Me." Her thumb moved once against my knuckles, deliberate, restrained. A woman holding a much larger thing very carefully in both hands. "Tell me to stop." "Don't," I said again, and this time I closed the last of the distance myself, and the storm went on breaking around us, while for one long, suspended moment, neither of us was cold at all. We didn't speak of it again that night. There wasn't room. Between the downed line and the dark and Marisol shouting for more hands. But 2 mornings later, once the power was restored and my name was formally cleared by a forensic audit that traced the falsified file's true upload origin to an IP address inside Camille's own office, Helena knocked on the cottage door holding 2 mugs of something that had gone lukewarm on the walk over, and said, simply, "I owe you a conversation I keep almost starting." We had it at the kitchen table, Bettina conveniently elsewhere, and it unspooled the way real confessions do, not in order, not gracefully. Helena told me about Anna properly this time, how they'd met over a contested zoning permit and married 11 months later, because neither of them had ever wasted time pretending patience was a virtue. How Anna had gone into Cormorant Tower against every safety protocol because she trusted her own eyes over a signed report, and how the floor she'd been standing on had been the one shaved by 11%. "I built an empire out of never again," Helena said, turning the mug in her hands without drinking from it. "I mistook control for strength for 6 years. It took a woman falling asleep in a car outside my gate to show me the difference. I told her mine in return, the bedroom doorway. My mother's photograph in my father's hand, the sentence he'd never taken back. I told her about the paper cranes, how my mother used to fold them with me at the kitchen table to give my anxious hands somewhere safe to go, and how I still did it sometimes, alone, when the old shame got loud." Helena listened the way she read a floor plan, completely, without interrupting the load-bearing parts. "Show me," she said. So I did, folding a crooked crane out of a torn grocery receipt right there at her table, and she watched my hands the entire time like they were the most interesting structural problem she'd been handed in years. That was the week I learned the iron matriarch of Marchetti Holdings, a woman who had once silenced an entire boardroom with 4 words, could be soundly defeated by a jammed dishwasher door, muttering at the appliance with a level of controlled fury she'd never once directed at a hostile takeover, until I reached past her, jiggled the latch a half-inch to the left, and it swung open without complaint. "You've been doing that wrong for 6 years, I said. "I've had other priorities," she said, with the particular dignity of a woman who knows she's just lost an argument to a kitchen appliance, and I laughed until my ribs ached, and for one whole evening, nothing in the world was cold, and no one outside that kitchen mattered at all. That peace lasted 11 days. It ended with Marisol's voice on the phone at 6 in the morning, tight in a way I'd never heard from her, telling Helena to turn on the news before she said another word. The footage was already looping by the time we reached the main house television, a press conference, hastily arranged. Camille Voss standing behind a podium with a face arranged into careful sorrow, announcing that Marchetti Holdings' recent structural review had been compromised by an unlicensed, unvetted employee, an Omega, she made sure to specify, voice-dipping with practiced regret, who had fabricated data to discredit a rival executive out of personal obsession with the company's CEO. She had photographs. Doctored, I'd learn later, but convincing enough on a morning broadcast, my face circled in red beside a headline that used the word infiltrated. She's rewriting it, I said, numb. She's making the fraud mine. She's buying time, Helena said, already dialing Marisol, voice gone to flint. Which means she knows the real audit is close enough to threaten her. It was closer than any of us knew. By noon, Halcyon Point's site foreman called an emergency structural walkthrough, routine, he insisted, standard pre-occupancy inspection, and specifically requested Wren Castellan's presence to sign off on the mechanical floor, per new board directive. I should have questioned a directive that arrived by phone instead of by Marisol's hand. I didn't, because refusing looked, in that particular week, exactly like guilt. I took the elevator up to the 31st floor alone, the visitor badge finally replaced with my real one, and I did not learn until the doors sealed behind me and the foreman's radio went conveniently silent that the elevator car itself had been rerouted and that the only other person on that floor was a security contractor I didn't recognize, positioned by the stairwell door with an expression that told me plainly this was not a routine inspection at all. The floor beneath my feet groaned once, low, a sound I felt in my back teeth before I heard it, and every calculation I had ever run in my life converged into a single, terrible certainty. Someone had loaded that mechanical floor with test weights far past anything on record, and the door behind me had just locked. The lights along the 31st floor buzzed once and dimmed to half power, and somewhere below me a generator I hadn't authorized kicked into a higher gear, feeding weight I hadn't approved into a floor I had personally flagged as already over tolerance. I understood, with the particular clarity terror sometimes grants instead of stealing, exactly what Camille had built here, not an accident, a demonstration. Discredit the Omega, then let the Omega's own warning become the accident that buries her credibility along with the evidence. The stairwell door was locked. The elevator, when I hit the call button with the flat of my hand, gave back only a dead, patient hum. My phone had one bar and a signal that flickered like a held breath. Marisol, I said, the second the call connected, keeping my voice level, though the floor answered every shift of my weight with a groan that traveled up through my shoes. 31. I'm locked in. They've loaded weight onto the mechanical floor past anything in the file. It's going to fail. How long? Marisol said, already moving. I could hear the wind of it, a door slamming, an engine turning over. I don't know exactly, I said. Minutes, not more. Helena's 5 minutes out, Marisol said. Talk to me. Tell me what you see. I made myself look instead of feel, counted the load points, the deflection already visible in the ceiling tile above the mechanical run, the particular sag pattern I'd only ever seen once before, in a photograph in the Cormorant file. In a floor a woman named Anna had been standing on when it gave way. The failure point isn't where they think it is, I said, half to Marisol, half to myself, because saying it out loud kept the shaking out of my hands. It's not the center span. It's the cantilever, the overhang above the northeast stair. If it goes, it takes the stair core with it. Get away from the stair core, Marisol said. I'm locked in near it, I said. There's nowhere else on this floor. The ceiling tile above the cantilever cracked audibly, a sound like a knuckle popping at the size of a building, and dust sifted down in a fine gray curtain, and I did the only thing I had ever known how to do under pressure that wasn't shake. I moved to the load path I'd have designed myself. The one true beam still carrying weight the way it was meant to, and I stood beneath it, and I counted seconds instead of breaths, out loud, into the phone, so that someone, somewhere, would know exactly how long I had left if the count ran out. At 41 seconds, the stairwell door blew inward off its hinges, and Helena Marchetti came through it soaked in sweat and fury, a crowbar still swinging from one hand, Marisol 2 steps behind her, with a security override key that should have worked 20 minutes earlier and hadn't. "Move," Helena said, already reaching for me, and I moved, and the two of us made it 4 steps toward the true beam before the cantilever gave in earnest, the whole northeast corner folding downward with a sound too large for a human throat to make sense of, and Helena turned her body between me and the falling ceiling the way you'd turn a shield, taking the worst of the debris across her shoulder and skull, and we went down together in the dust and the dark with her arm locked around me like a woman who had already decided, long before this exact moment, that she would rather be broken than let anything fall on the person she loved. We lay there in the ringing quiet after, her blood warm against my collarbone, her breath ragged but present, and I put both hands flat against the wound at her scalp and held pressure and screamed for Marisol until my throat tore, and somewhere below us I could already hear the sirens starting. Too late to have prevented this, exactly in time to keep it from being the only thing that happened. They pulled us out through the stairwell 20 minutes later, Helena conscious, but gray, refusing the stretcher until she'd confirmed with her own eyes that I was upright and unbroken, and it was only once the paramedics had her strapped down against her considerable objections that I learned Camille Voss had been arrested at the building's loading dock. In the act of retrieving a laptop she'd meant to wipe, caught on camera confirming the load numbers to the contractor who'd rigged the floor, a recording Marisol had quietly triggered the second my first call came through. Because Marisol Cade, it turned out, had spent 11 years learning exactly how far Camille's ambition could reach and had simply been waiting for the moment it reached too far to survive. I rode in the ambulance holding Helena's hand instead of letting go once, all the way to the hospital, and somewhere on that ride, gray-faced, stitched, refusing morphine until she'd said what she needed to say, Helena Marchetti told me she loved me for the first time, in a voice with no strategy left in it at all. Only truth, plain as a beam that holds. I would like to say the reckoning happened quietly. It didn't. It happened in front of cameras, 3 weeks later, in the same lobby where I'd first corrected a stranger's math, because Helena decided the company that Camille had tried to burn down deserved to watch it rebuilt in daylight. The recording played first, Camille's own voice, flat, with the confidence of someone who'd never expected to be caught, confirming to the contractor that the mechanical floor could take the extra weight because, quote, no one who mattered would be standing on it when it failed. The room went silent the way rooms do when a comfortable story collapses all at once. Then came the audit, presented not by lawyers but by me, standing at a podium I'd never imagined myself behind, walking a room full of engineers and journalists through the same 11% error, the same rounding shortcut, repeated across 9 years and 2 towers, one of which had already cost a woman her life. Cormorant Tower did not fail because of bad luck, I said, and my voice did not shake, because I had spent my whole life learning to hold weight without shaking. It failed because someone decided a shortcut was cheaper than the truth. Halcyon Point almost failed for the same reason. The only difference this time is that someone caught it before the building had to teach us the lesson twice. Camille Voss was let out in handcuffs before the press conference ended, her sherry-colored composure gone entirely. And as she passed the row where Josie stood with her arms crossed, my former colleague hissed something ugly about omegas and their place, and Josie leaned in, sweet as poison returned to its source, and said, "Funny, I hear the Omega just redesigned the building you tried to collapse. Good luck decorating your cell." Helena found me afterward on the same lobby floor where this had all begun, her head still bandaged beneath her collar, and in front of the cameras that hadn't yet lost interest, in front of Marisol and Josie and Bettina, who had come specifically to see this, she took both my hands in hers. I have spent 6 years telling myself that control was the same thing as strength, she said, loud enough for the room, quiet enough that it still felt like it was only for me. You taught me they were never the same thing at all. Love isn't something that happens to you like a scent you can't help. It's a choice. I choose you, Wren Castellan. Every day there's an after. I will choose you again. Ask me with your words, I said, because some gates you open on purpose, in front of witnesses, so the answer means something. Will you let me claim you? Helena asked, voice dropping to the register she used for vows and structural truths alike, bond and bite, in front of everyone who will ever need to know it's real. Yes, I said. Ask me again tonight, when it's just us, and I'll say it again. She did. That night, in the cottage that had been mine since the first cold week, under a lamp I'd finally learned to angle the way I liked, Helena asked me a third time, low against my throat, restraint shaking through her like a held door finally allowed to open, and I said yes with my whole chest, and the bite that followed was gentle and certain and utterly unlike the collapse it echoed, a floor that held, finally, exactly as it was designed to. Helena proposed properly 4 months later, which is to say badly, on one knee in the half-finished lobby of the tower that used to be called Halcyon Point, holding a small box she'd apparently been carrying around for 3 weeks, working up the nerve, which struck both of us, once I'd said yes, as extremely funny given everything else she'd faced down without flinching. "You'll notice," she said, sliding the ring on with hands that had stopped a falling ceiling without a tremor and now couldn't manage a simple clasp, that I am significantly better at facing armed contractors than I am at this. "Noted," I said, laughing, and kissed her anyway. We married in the garden behind the main house in early spring, under the lamp from Anna's old study, which Helena had finally, gently, allowed to be moved downstairs where it could light something new instead of only guarding the past. Josie stood beside me radiant and smug in equal measure. Marisol, in a suit instead of a security earpiece for the first time in 11 years, told the small gathered crowd, "I have run this household for over a decade, and in that time, I have never once seen Helena Marcati wait for anyone." She waited 40 minutes in the rain outside a beat-up sedan on Larkspur Lane because some part of her already knew. Bettina cried into a dish towel she'd forgotten to remove from her shoulder, and the wedding cake, made from my mother's recipe, olive oil and amaretto, disappeared before the toasts were finished. My father did not come. I sent the invitation anyway, because closing a door on purpose is different from having one closed on you, and some part of me needed to know I'd offered it. He never answered. I did not wait by the phone. Camille Voss was sentenced 8 months after the Halcyon Point collapse attempt, convicted on fraud and endangerment charges that carried real weight. Her father's old cover-up unearthed alongside her own, and both filed permanently into public record so that no future contractor could ever again claim the numbers had simply been a matter of human error. A year on, the tower reopened under a different name entirely, the Anna Marchetti Memorial Library, glass-walled, tall-windowed. Exactly the kind of reading room I described once as a child's wish to no one but Helena. Late at night, half embarrassed to admit I still carried it. She had commissioned it before I'd finished the sentence. I led its design myself, every load calculation triple-checked, every beam exactly as strong as it claimed to be, and on opening day I found a small paper crane folded from receipt paper sitting on the front desk, made crooked on purpose, in handwriting I'd taught by hand. We keep 2 keys on the same ring now, the old brass one, worn soft at the teeth, and a new one cut the week we married, engraved so small you have to hold it to the light to read it, never cold again. On mornings when the light comes low and gold through the kitchen window, Helena still makes the coffee wrong on purpose, so I'll laugh at her, and I still fold cranes when the old shame gets loud, and some mornings she folds one back, badly, just to watch my face do the thing it does. I used to believe that being overlooked was simply the shape my life had been built to hold, load-bearing, permanent, incapable of correction. I have learned instead that the right person does not walk past what everyone else has decided to ignore. She stops. She kneels to your level in the cold. She presses a key into your hand and means it as a promise, not a kindness spent once and forgotten. Being truly seen does not erase what you survived to get there. It simply means you never have to carry it alone again. The end.